In today's photography tutorial, I'm photographing watches. I've got some really great tips for you guys, and I'm going to be going through an entire shoot step by step. Stick around and I'll get started in just a sec. Hi guys, I'm Ben from Adaptalux and welcome back to another photography tutorial where today we are shooting watches. I've got a few really unique and interesting watches that I want to get some nice close-up professional looking photographs of. And the main photograph that I want to get is of this brand new watch from Humism. It's got some nice kinetic art on the front. It looks really interesting, and most importantly it's got a little window on the back so we can see some of the moving parts. So we're going to get some nice photographs of the front of a couple of different watches, and then I do want to focus on that interesting mechanism in the back of this watch. So contrary to popular belief, you don't need a huge amount of equipment. You don't need a full studio to photograph watches in a professional manner. In fact, I'm just doing this on my table in my living room, and I'm going to be using some really simple techniques to change the look of my watches. The first thing that you do need to do is take a look at the watches that you want to photograph. I've got a few different watches here. Most of them are digital, so not too interesting, but I've got a couple of really unique ones here. This one is from a company called Optic Instruments. They ran a Kickstarter, and this is a 24-hour watch, which is still analog, and it's got a full dial on the front that twists all the way around to show you 24 hours in a day. The other one is the one that I mentioned with this kinetic art on the front, and we'll get a closer look of that in just a moment. But both of these watches have black straps and silver casings, or silver looking cases at least. So I want to photograph these on a white background. That's going to give me a nice amount of contrast between those black straps, the silver of the casing, and then the black watch faces. To do that, I'm going to be using something quite simple, a sheet of white printer paper just held up by my macro subject holder and sitting on the floor with a little bit of a curve. My table is white and I could shoot on that if I wanted to, but this curve is going to allow me to fade off the white bright background into the background. If you want to shoot on a black background, I will link up in the top right hand corner to a video just dedicated on black background photography. Today we're shooting on white, so I'm going to be wrapping up my watches. I'm going to do up the strap here so that we've got a little curve and a circle, and then I'm going to be placing my watches first of all flat on their sides like this, just on my paper. I'm going to be shooting from this direction and getting nice and low down to my surface so that we're looking straight on at the face of the watch. So I've got my camera sat down nice and low on a tripod, and I would recommend shooting on a tripod for something like this because you're going to be making quite a lot of fine adjustments to the placement of your watch, your lighting, and to the camera itself, and you don't want to be lining up your shot every single time that you make a change. I also have a macro focusing rail here between the camera and the tripod, and that's going to allow me to make really fine adjustments to the placement of my camera and be able to focus stack as well. My camera today is a Sony a7 III, and on the front here I've got a 100mm f2.8 Tokina lens. This is going to allow me to get nice and close because it's a macro lens. You don't necessarily need a macro lens for this. You don't necessarily need a full-on proper camera setup like this. You can photograph watches on your phone. It's more about the lighting than it is about your choice of camera equipment. Now, speaking of our lighting, I need to set up some lighting to make this scene look a little bit more interesting and certainly a lot more professional. Before we talk about our lighting, we need to talk about reflections and the reflective nature of this type of subject. Watches and jewelry usually have some sort of shiny surface on them, not least the front of the watch here where we have some glass. I'm using this 100% genuine tag watch here as a demonstration because there's a huge amount of detail on this watch, and all of these shiny surfaces at different angles are going to catch different light from different directions. To use an example, just moving this watch around, you'll see that it's catching all sorts of different reflections in my room, including the window that's over there and the photography lighting that's over here. So my video lights are a huge amount of extra lights that is really hard to control. We need to take control out of all of that light, close our windows, turn off any video lights that you have, and then you'll be able to place your lights exactly where you need them to be on your watch without some erroneous lights coming in from random directions. Just turning off those two big softbox video lights makes a huge difference to that scene that we were just looking at. Both of those big reflections on the corners of the case of the watch were generated by lights that aren't meant to be in this photograph. It's worth considering where the lights are in your room. Maybe they're windows or lamps in the corner. Are they reflecting on your watch? The answer is almost certainly yes in one way or another. So it's worth just thinking about what ambient light is around and trying to minimize it as much as possible. Once you've minimized and taken control of the ambient light in your room, you can start to think about the actual light that you want to place on your watch. Obviously, that scene that we're just looking at is quite underexposed. It looks murky and horrible, not very professional at all. And that's because it's just using that ambient light in the room. It's very underexposed. So we need to place some of our own light onto the front of our watch to illuminate the parts of the watch that we want to see the most, the face of the watch and the reflection along the edge. So to place your light exactly where you need it, you're going to need a really flexible light source. Today I have the Adaptalux Studio to perform that task. I've got the control pod up here on a mini tripod so that I can just place my entire lighting setup on my desk. Into my control pod I can place these flexible lighting arms which illuminate nice and brightly, and I can flex these lighting arms around to be exactly where I need them to be in relation to my watch. This is going to make it really easy to make adjustments to my lighting, placing those reflections exactly where they need to be on this complex item. So as you can see there, in just a few seconds of placing those lighting arms into the pod and moving them around, we've gone from a pretty underexposed, miserable looking photograph to something a little bit more flashy. Now obviously that's just because there's a lot more light now hitting my watch, and there's still a lot of adjustments to make, but just being able to place that light down really easily. We've got two lights in the front and one light lighting up the background of my shot. It's really easy to see exactly how you can play around with your lighting. Being able to see what your lighting is doing is a big advantage as well. So the fact that this is continuous light instead of flash removes any guesswork on how your image is going to look as you're setting everything up. You can just place your lights and see exactly how your photo is looking on the back of the camera. So let's take a look at this pretty simple white light setup in a little more detail. It's not as complicated as it looks, and it's really easy to adjust as well. So we've got two white lighting arms down here with diffusers on the ends of the arms. These are just magnetic and they can just clip on and off at will. So those are lighting up the front of my watch, and this is a really complex watch to light as well, because each of those little kinetic wheels, if you like, on the front of the watch is actually creating shadows and casting shadows onto the white back base of the face of the watch. Lastly, we have this white lighting arm S back here lighting up the background. Now this needs to be much brighter than these two white lights at the front. So this light is set to 100% brightness, while the two lights at the front are on 50% and then also diffused. So there's a lot less light hitting the front of the watch, and overall that gives us an overexposed white background, which is exactly what we're looking for. So if I've not hammered it home enough, the placement of your light is really critical here. Every slight movement and change in your lighting is going to change the reflections on your watch. Now this is completely down to personal taste where you want those reflections to sit, but the biggest thing is to look out for the detail on the watch. Any names or interesting features, you don't want them to be covered up and blown out by reflections of some poorly placed lighting. So far this shot is pretty straightforward, both figuratively and literally. We're only looking straight onto the front of the watch, which makes it really quite easy to avoid those reflections. It gets really tricky when you move the watch off to an angle or when you're shooting a watch with a curved front. So I'm going to take the challenge. I'm going to move my watch off to the side a little bit and see if we can use this same technique with a few adjustments to photograph it from an angle. Excuse the darkness for a moment. I've got those video lights turned off so that I'm not getting any weird reflections on my watch because this is really tricky. I've swapped to my other watch, the one with the curved front here, and that has made it really tricky. I've also moved it off to the side, so we're actually looking at the front glass from an angle. You can see that just small adjustments of this main light here, which is now undiffused, anywhere I place it, there will be some sort of reflection. The way that I've combated that is actually moving it really high up so that it's out of view of that curve of the glass. What I'm also looking to do is add a little bit of color. This watch has a nice blue tinge on the bottom half, the nighttime side of the watch. So if I just remove this white diffuser and place on a blue color filter, something really interesting happens. One of those reflections along the outside of the watch turns to blue. Now we can harness this just to add a little bit of extra detail and interest in our images. You can go as far and as crazy as you like, even adding some colored backgrounds using your lighting or using it entirely colored light to complement the colors on your watch. So I'm pretty happy with the stills and the video that I've just got of the front of my two watches. And if you're using video at all, it's really nice to just capture that slight movement that watches have, particularly on something like this kinetic watch that we've got here. It's really satisfying to watch those hands, for lack of a better word, go round. Now I do want to take a look at the detail on the back of this watch as well. Like I mentioned, we've got this little window on the back where we can see some of the mechanism working, and to do that we're going to need to get a lot closer. So taking a look at the back of the watch, I've obviously flipped the watch upside down and actually propped it up a little bit, and my camera is much closer because I have this reverse lens setup, which is super high magnification. I will link to a video up in the top right hand corner that explains this reverse lens concept, but it's just an easy and cheap way to get a lot more magnification without having to buy a dedicated super macro lens. Now, as you can see, we've had to change our lighting as well. I've got one light that is diffused, this light just here, and then two undiffused white lights as well. Now, there is no rhyme or reason to the placement of these lights. It's simply a case of taking a look at your shot and placing them in a way that is pleasing to the eye and highlights the areas of the watch that you want to highlight. With something as complex as this mechanism, you can't say, oh, you need to put a light up in the top right-hand corner of your shot because that top right hand corner might not illuminate the reflective nature of these parts enough, or the reflection might just be in the middle of your scene, which is obviously no good. And you can see just the tiny little movements that I'm making here are making a huge difference to the way that my shot is coming out. This big reflective diffuser just here is actually highlighting the corner of the watch just there, just to highlight, or rather I actually quite like it without the kinetic art logo just there, the etching on the side of the watch. I think I actually prefer it without that now that I've moved it away. So that shows the nature of the experimentation, moving your lighting around and seeing what works and what you like best. So I hope watching along with this shoot has impressed upon you the importance of lighting when it comes to watch photography. You can change your lens, your camera, the placement of your watch, the watch itself, but the biggest factor by far is going to be your lighting and controlling those reflections and how the light is interacting with your particular watch. Every watch is completely different, and it's going to take a different lighting style and setup for each different photograph that you take of each different watch. You can experiment around a lot with something as flexible and modular as the Adaptalux Studio, placing different lighting arms, different color filters, and even different colored lights into your images can really make them stand out from the crowd of watch photographs that are out there. If you enjoyed this watch photography tutorial and all of the photographs that I got today, let me know by leaving a comment down under the video and hit the like button while you're down there. Subscribe for lots more macro photography ideas, tutorials, and inspiration coming in the future. For now, that is all that I've got time for. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.